Hello, and welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas into what it means to live as a follower of Jesus in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
All right. Hey, and thanks for listening into the Future Christian Podcast. My name is Lauren Richmond Jr., and I'm pleased to be joined by Ally Henny. Hello.
Hi.
Well, thanks so much for taking some time out of your schedule. I wanted to kind of give you some broad introduction, but I really don't know you super well at all. Just looking at your bio, I know you're a recent graduate of Fuller Seminary, and you did a time, was it theologian in residence at church I used to go to, Brentwood Christian Church in Springfield, Missouri?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. What else could you tell our listeners about yourself?
Let's see. So my undergrad degree was in psychology. I graduated from Missouri State University with a degree in psychology and a minor in religious studies in 2008. And so after that, I had been in ministry in kind of different capacities and in some different types of churches, mostly kind of in the non-denominational Pentecostal / charismatic realm. Had been in ministry, been a youth pastor and that type of stuff. Started that I was whenever I was in college, really. So 2004, 2005, and had done that for many years. And I led my last youth group in the 2016, 2017 school year, but kind of in between all of that. So I had done youth ministry solidly for probably about 7 or 8 years. And then, or maybe even closer to 10 years. I guess it was probably closer to 10 years that I did youth ministry pretty solidly. And then, I guess I was right the first time I said about 7 or 8 years, but then, had some, different times off with moving and having 2 kids. I have 2 kids who are, 3 and 6 years old. And then, kind of moved out of youth ministry for a little bit in doing serving in various capacities in other churches. And then, like I said, I led my last youth group in the 2016-2017 school year. And then since then, I entered seminary at Fuller in 2017. And so I was an associate pastor as part of my apprenticeship, which is just like a fancy word that Fuller uses for like doing a ministry internship. Yeah. So I helped plant a church in Springfield with that. And then kind of during my seminary, kind of overlapping the little bit, Phil Snyder and Emily Bowen Marler invited me to be the theologian in residence at Brentwood. And so I did that, and then all that kind of hit right as the pandemic. I was only able to really fulfill that aspect of my ministry there for just temporarily. I preached a few times and did some discussions and stuff with Phil, and then the pandemic hit. And so now I'm still we're working on ways for me to be able to work with Brentwood remotely, because my family, first of all, because of the pandemic, but second of all, because my family relocated to Chicago. And so it makes it harder to be a theologian in residence whenever you're not actually living in the city. So we're working, imagining some kind of creative ways to be able,
That's awesome. I was thinking about that. It's one of the, I don't know, silver linings maybe about this is we're finding new ways to interact with different communities from far away.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I didn't realize, I think it was around 2007, maybe. I'm not sure if it was 2008. I tried a little entrance into Missouri State because I was going to pursue a master's in religious studies, and I took a couple undergrad religious studies courses just to get my prereqs, and I took one summer class and I dropped out and said, this isn't for me. and eventually enrolled in seminary. But that's
Oh,
awesome.
wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me what it's meant being a Christian in your past, and then if anything's different, what's that look like now?
So in the past, I grew up in the Black church and in the African American church tradition. Started out in a Baptist church, and then whenever I was a teenager, my family started attending a Black Pentecostal church. And so it wasn't until I went to college that I started attending predominantly white churches. So sort of, the Black church is my mother tongue. It's my mother church. In fact, something that's been exciting about moving back to Chicago, or moving to Chicago.
Yeah.
It has been, because I'm a native Missourian, but moving to Chicago, an exciting prospect, despite kind of the pandemic, has been the prospect of being able to worship again in a predominantly Black church context. And so I'm looking forward to that. But the Black church definitely has shaped who I am as a Christian. It shaped who I am in my faith walk. And so it's definitely been something that I'm recognizing now, because I've spent a lot of my adult life in churches that were predominantly white, or kind of white-led multi-ethnic churches. And so even realizing, just kind of as I've gotten older here in these last few years, recognizing just how invaluable that experience has been growing up in the Black church. A lot of Black folks, even anymore, a lot of them, especially if they occupy quote unquote evangelical Christian spaces, I'm finding increasingly that there's some folks that's all they've ever known. And so I'm thankful that I've had experiences with the Christian faith outside of contexts that are white dominated. And so that's been something that's really informed and has shaped my faith.
Awesome. Are you willing to share kind of anything about, I'm making assumptions here, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but I imagine kind of the non-denominational churches you're a part of different contextually, theologically than, say, Brentwood Christian Church, that our listeners may not be familiar with, but is a church in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and pretty liberal, I would say, theologically and practically speaking. Yeah, are you willing to share anything about that? If there's any shift there or journey that's brought you to this space?
Yeah, I think that so a lot of my time, like I said, a lot of the adult life spent kind of in Pentecostal and charismatic circles, and that's definitely my grammar, I guess it were. As a Christian, I look at my life, my faith, sort of through that lens. I'm an Episcopalian now, but with all of that said, Episcopalian, and then I've worked with different churches, and have worked but not all of the non-denominational churches. In fact, the church that I helped plant actually is now a Disciples of Christ church. We were interdenominational.
Oh, that's awesome.
Whenever I started it, but then it's now a Disciples church. But that all happened after I left, after I'd moved on and stuff after my apprenticeship. But yeah, it's been whenever I say think of journey, once again I go back to some of those Black church touch points that a lot of how I learned how to view scripture and whatever kind of comes from that context. And so that's a little bit different than I was in churches that there are people that maybe would consider themselves to be evangelical churches. Pentecostals are kind of different kind of within church camps, in that they technically, depending especially upon they technically are evangelical, but would not, a lot of them would not wear that label, would not identify in that way, even though increasingly they are. There's Pentecostalism kind of has this weird kind of relationship with evangelicalism, because Pentecostals and charismatics often kind of see themselves as different than kind of the mainstream of churches, and I say mainstream and not mainline for a reason. So, and Pentecostals also see themselves as different from the mainline and stuff also, but of churches that might be similar in a lot of ways. And there's definitely something to be said of the Pentecostalization of, like, for instance, the Southern Baptist churches or whatever. There's been a lot of kind of cross pollination, a lot of whatever that sometimes it is hard to discern different denominational churches from one another. So, but for me, being somebody that came from the Black church, and so coming from not necessarily a historic denomination like the AME or something, or the Church of God in Christ or something like that, but just Black churches that were historically Black and were founded by Black people and had Black members. Coming from that frame, there were definitely some commonalities, especially in terms of the Pentecostalism and some of the different beliefs and stuff there. But in terms of culture wars Christianity, which is what I typically associate with evangelicalism. I don't know if that's, which is why I've never really considered myself to be an evangelical. There are times, I think I had a blog post that I was looking at long ago. I was like, oh yeah, we're evangelical Christians, but it's more of kind of like a kind of shorthand way of saying, okay, and actually I was saying it kind of by way of making a joke about something, but I never really kind of viewed myself as, I always, even being in some of those contexts where it's like, okay, we're going to have culture war Christianity, I always kind of look at people like, what is this? What do you mean you're going to freak out about evolution? Like you can't believe in evolution and believe in Jesus. You talk about believing in evolution, even evolution can't be true and the Bible can't be true at the same time. Why is this something? People kids talking about oh, we can't, something that was a pet peeve of mine, as a youth pastor is kind of funny even, that happened. I was in a church and I didn't intend for this I didn't intend for this to happen at all. But there was one Wednesday night that I was preaching to youth group, and I was telling them, I was basically this whole idea that you can't pray in school because you're a Christian is a load of crap. You can pray at school. It is okay. The thing is that your teachers can't mandate you to pray in school. They can't have a time, your teachers have to be careful about how they approach prayer and stuff. But you as a Christian have every right to pray in school, and don't let anybody tell you that you can't pray in school. And if somebody says, oh, well, they're taking prayers out of school, they're full of crap. And so not very long after that, the pastor of the church said that in the message, and I was like, whoop. And I don't know if anybody else caught it, but I was like, so the pastor of the church is all talking about oh, they're trying to take prayer out of schools, blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, fam, fam, it's okay. They're really not coming for your kids praying in school. Wow. And people I remember one time seeing a kid wearing a shirt, something that was handcuff me, I prayed in school today. Yeah. No, fam, nobody, it's really not that deep, fam. You can pray at school. Nobody's keeping you from praying at school. You can totally do that. And so I always kind of found myself, and I was having this conversation with my husband probably about a year ago, actually, exactly a year ago. We were having this conversation on our way back from dropping our nephew off, who had visited us for a couple of weeks during the summer. And so we were just kind of long car ride and stuff back home, and we were talking about stuff. And so I had just finished Searching for Sunday by Rachel Held Evans. It was actually that not this being several months after she had passed. I don't have a whole lot in common with Rachel in terms of our faith journey, but definitely a friend had recommended Searching for Sunday for a whole other set of reasons than what the book actually deals with. But it was something that was life changing for me, even though our stories and kind of some of the different things that she talks about aren't my story at all, or at all whatsoever, but just hearing how God worked in her life, it was something that really spoke to me. And so we had listened to it on the car ride to drop my nephew off. And so then whenever we were on our way back home, we were talking about stuff, and we just kind of had this epiphany that's like, yeah, we've always been in kind of some of these spaces, but like we didn't think like these people. And I mean that just like, and I don't mean that to be be like condescending or anything like that. Like, there's no condescension or anything. But just recognizing that I definitely approached God and the Bible and culture in a much different way. And so then going to Fuller, which is a quote unquote evangelical seminary, but it is, but it also isn't at the same time. And so, and it's really interesting to even look at some of my classmates and stuff, some of my colleagues and stuff at Fuller, that I think that a lot of us think a lot differently than what people would expect people who would go to Fuller to think on certain issues and stuff. And it was a really, really interesting ride and it was a great part of my faith. Something that really helped develop and shape my faith to be there and be part of that institution. Also for all of its issues, because there's sometimes whenever that quote unquote evangelical aspect comes to bite Fuller in the behind, when they don't treat certain students well because of their sexual orientation, and so there is some of that there still, but it's just really interesting because like a lot of my classmates, a lot of people that I knew there, like vehemently disagreed with Fuller. So it's like, hold on a second, what do you mean? So it's like almost kind of like this kind of weird, like, it's just a weird place. But I say all that to say that, during seminary, reaching kind of this place in my faith where I realized, I guess I'm Anglican, and also, looking for I'm not ordained in the Episcopal Church, but kind of discerning what that means, feeling called to be ordained in the church. And so looking for a church that espouses some of my values and espouses some of the things that I kind of am exploring and kind of enjoy about worship and that type of thing. And so the Episcopal Church has been a great fit, but it's like, wow, I guess I kind of have been Episcopalian all along and didn't realize it. Or even thinking about talking about serving at Brentwood. And Phil has been I've known Phil for several years now, and so we kind of have run in some of the same circles and everything. And so Phil has I think that we have mutually challenged each other, perhaps not even realizing that we kind of have challenged each other and stretched each other and pulled each other kind of along the way. But even just being involved with Brentwood and kind of for years being adjacent to Brentwood through Phil and Emily and everything has been tremendous in recognizing, like, oh yeah, okay, some of these mainline people, I would not consider myself. I mean, I know that I attend a mainline denomination, but I don't consider, but it's like kind of in this weird place of like, not like fitting in some ways, some places, but then not fitting in other places in other ways. So it's kind of like, being too charismatic or whatever for mainline people, perhaps, but being like way too not evangelical for evangelicals. But definitely the Episcopal Church in many ways has felt like home, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity once the pandemic dies down or gets to a place where we can all worship together here again. I'm looking forward to being part of a Black Episcopal Church, which is different than other Episcopal churches. So yeah.
Well, great. I'm curious if there's any spiritual practices that you've recently developed or would share as something that's been meaningful for you.
Yeah, so there's several things. I have always enjoyed spiritual disciplines. It's always been a vital part of my faith. And so even just in seminary, learning different types of spiritual practices that I didn't know existed,
Yeah.
or things that I already kind of organically did, but maybe didn't have, like, didn't have a name for it, didn't
Yeah.
know that, like, oh yeah, this is something that people have done in the church for centuries, and it's just something that I kind of thought, like, oh, whatever. So I definitely am somebody that I really enjoy that type of thing, and I definitely need to make more room for various practices in my life, but some of the things that just more recently have been giving me life is one thing that I do. Episcopalians, we have the Book of Common Prayer,
Yeah.
which is like it's basically kind of what our worship services tend to be based off of. Some Episcopalians do more or stick closer to the book than others do, but it's kind of the outline for our worship services, and then for other services and stuff in the church. And so there's a lot of different things within the Book of Common Prayer, but one of those things is something called the daily office, which is a mixture of prayer and scripture reading. And so there is a podcast that I listen to that actually it's a daily office podcast, but it actually doesn't go off. The people who created it kind of created their own lectionary, but it's still off of the sort of based on the Revised Common Lectionary, but kind of not. So I listened to that, and then with the actual BCP lectionary, I spend time in the morning. I'm trying to get morning and evening, but right now I've only been able to do the morning, where I read through the morning readings in the lectionary and kind of make some notes and stuff on them. So I have that, and then I also have an Anglican rosary, which is different than like a Catholic rosary. Instead of a Catholic rosary has 5 decades, so 5 sets of 10 beads. An Anglican rosary has 4 sets of 7 beads. So instead of a decade, it's a week. And you have like 4. So there's like 4 sets of those, and each of those is called like a cruciform or whatever. And so there are some prayers that so instead of praying, I mean, I guess you could pray Hail Mary, but instead of praying the Hail Mary, there are several different books that kind of have some different types of prayers and stuff that you can do. So it's kind of I think of it, the way that I do it is kind of more of a contemplative prayer type of thing. And so I use that, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Those are kind of the things I'm doing right now. Yeah.
And the BCP, that's Book of Common Prayer, yes?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I want to ask you about Fuller, and I'm not sure if you familiar with Phillips Seminary in Tulsa.
Yes.
I just interviewed the president, I think, couple weeks ago, and the question I asked her, which is kind of a hard question, but it's a question I seriously think about as much as I love theological education. Like, as a recent grad, like, what advice do you have for future students about like balancing the costs of seminary with also, at least what I'm seeing is like diminishing job prospects, lower salaries, all that?
So yeah, at this point there's no way around that I can perceive, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that you have to kind of know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's not even the seminary isn't even really the issue. Some of this comes down to it's a catch-22 for denominations.
Okay.
And so denomination is often denominational entities that require a certain level of education.
Right.
And even within that, there's an aspect of that is inherently classist.
Yes.
You're going to pay thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars for an education, and schools often do not subsidize that education. Now, if you're fortunate enough to get into a school like Princeton
Mm-hmm.
or Georgetown or something like that, you can be fully funded even for an MDiv. I believe that Princeton fully funds their MDiv program, but because they have endowment money and all that other type of stuff. But a lot of seminaries don't have that, and so they are at the mercy of students who are willing to pay and are willing to pay all that money. And I was a Fuller online student, so I didn't live in Pasadena. I was an online student, and incidentally, I mean, you're not paying any differently than, and so it's kind of interesting to me, like in some of this with the pandemic, where students are freaking out because they're like, well, I don't want to have to pay full price. And it's like, you know, if you were an online student at any institution, you are still paying full price. Like that's just what it is. It's like, I'm paying full price. And you know, I get that, you know, students wanting geophysical education. Like, I'm not necessarily putting students down, for that, but I think that for being upset that they still have to pay full tuition. At the same time, there are people who have paid, who have entire degrees, who've paid full tuition to, at the very least, do a hybrid program, if not online. And so you can argue one way or the other who's getting screwed on that. Was it the online students, or is it the students now? That's, you know, it really doesn't matter at the end of it. Talking, you know, seminary education is that we get to this place where denominations, and I'm not knocking education requirements at all. I think that, especially somebody coming from a non-denominational standpoint, coming from a non-denominational background. So, you know, somebody coming from, as someone coming from kind of a non-denominational perspective, I think that, you know, the democratization of information and knowledge is important. And I think that, you know, it's great. There are a lot of pastors and churches, you know, groups, fellowships and different things who have emerged, who sort of have gotten around some of those educational requirements. And I'm the type of person, I think that's great. You're called of God. God's sending you to do ministry. You're able to do ministry. That's great. But I also recognize that there can be, they can be problematic if leaders don't rightly know how to look at the scripture, and if there's certain things that they don't understand, and that can get messy. And so I say that, like, it's kind of this weird thing, because it's like, you know, I don't believe in theological gatekeeping. I think a lot of times, particularly white men, want to sit and want to gatekeep people's theology, and I don't think that that's okay. At the same time, I think that you can get a lot of you can have bad theology anywhere. But bad theology, even among exists even among the most learned, among the most educated of people. And so that's just kind of what it is. But with that said, I think that it's important for ministers, for pastors, to be educated in how to read the scripture. And then the other aspect of that is kind of just some of that stuff that's basic to ministry, outside of biblical interpretation and theology and that type of thing, is just like being educated in how to treat people and in how to approach the pulpit. Like, you know, I've encountered pastors who would use the pulpit in ways that it's like, well, if you had taken a homiletics class, like the basic homiletics class, they would have told you, like, don't, you know, process things that you're going through with members of the congregation in your sermon. But like, you didn't take a preaching class, so you don't know not to do that crap. And so, I mean, you would think that would be common sense, but it's not always. Common sense isn't always common. But like, you know, a seminary class that I mean, it doesn't mean like you have a seminary class and so then suddenly like you're not going to do that anymore, because there's still people who take it, who have taken seminary classes, who still do that. still do that crap, but it's different than like, but like there's a chance that could stop somebody from being a jerk in the pulpit.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if somebody, you know, is like you have books and things that you're reading and things that you're learning that are telling you, hey, don't be a jerk in the pulpit. And it's like, oh, hey, maybe I shouldn't be a jerk in the pulpit.
Imagine that.
And so it's like I said, I mean, there are people who are jerks in the pulpit and, you know, have PhDs. So education doesn't stop people from being jerks. That's just that like there's just, you can't do that. But my point is,
We'll hope it helps sometimes.
But we at least hope that it helps, that at least we'll like put a check in people's spirit, I guess. Yeah. So like, you know, so I say that, and I think that is one way that education can be important. And so I think that if denominations, if groups of Christians are wanting there to be more churches and wanting there to be more pastors and wanting the churches and stuff that they've developed to be healthy and solid, then I'm not necessarily saying like remove education requirements, but make education accessible to everyone. Like make it accessible to that person who has a calling but doesn't have $50,000 to spend, but doesn't have and maybe they're not going to maybe they're not going to, you know, qualify for the paltry amount of scholarship money that you give out. And so I think that some of that whenever you talk about dwindling job prospects and all of that, some of that is on denominations. I really think that some of that is on denominational leadership to encourage, I think that mainline churches are becoming more and more aged. There's mainline churches. One thing that I will give evangelicalism is that they have figured out, in some ways, how to bleed mainline churches and other churches dry, the mega church complex, where it's like, I mean, there's a point, you know, coming, and so this is somebody that I'm speaking as somebody who comes from the buckle of the Bible Belt, that like if you have, you know, a few churches that are able to draw thousands and even tens and thousands of people, that kind of hurts the little church on the corner that they're not able to provide. They don't have the resources and funds to be able to provide, like, you know, a children's ministry with the newest, fanciest, latest, whatever. And so that's a whole other thing. But I think that that a lot of denominations are going to have to start looking at not looking at their requirements in terms of, okay, we start requiring less of people, but looking at it in terms of accessibility. And so I think that for people, for students, for prospective people who are looking into becoming ministers, you really are going to have to be like, are you really called? Is this really what you want to do? Is this really what you want to do? I think that you're going to have to look at, you know what, you might really want to be a pastor, but you're probably going to have to be bivocational. And so you probably are going to need to cultivate other skills and other things that are necessary for the survival of your family, for your own survival, even if you're able to eat. So you'll be able to eat. And so I think that's something that we have to also that those of us going into ministry, I say this, I mean, I've been in ministry and whatever, but the people who are looking at that as a path is, why are you doing it? Do you have tens of thousands of dollars lying around to be able to do it? And then, like, are you really called to this? Like, you know, seminary is part of the process of being in seminary is discernment, right? But like, you know, don't, like, you can also, I believe in a democratic Holy Spirit, and I believe that, like, you can hear the Holy Spirit at the seminary, or you can hear the Holy Spirit like in your shower. And so like, you really, like, I mean, you can pay, you know, money for a spiritual director or whatever to help you be able to figure this out. Like, don't pay like $10,000 to go to seminary to figure out whether or not you're called. I mean, unless there are cheaper ways to do it, unless you just have that kind of money. I mean, if you've got it like that, okay. But like, know that you're called. And make your calling and election sure, as Peter, I think, said. Make sure that you know that what you're supposed to do is what you're supposed, that this is what you're supposed to do. I'm not saying that like God's going to pay off your student loans. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that like, okay, well, you're called, and so God's going to give you a scholarship, and thus said the Lord, those student loans are going to be paid because Jesus paid it all. Like, no, that's like, you're still going to have to pay Sally Mae and Freddie Mac and whoever else, FAFSA, whoever else these folks are. That's taking folks' money. Yeah, Mohila, listen. All these folks taking people's money. But yeah, just make sure that that's what you want to do and have other sources of income lined up.
I think what you say about like the bivocational thing is a super important thing too. When I was a freshman at Baptist Bible College there in Springfield, Missouri, I remember my mom telling me and trying to get me to say, hey, Lauren, you need to get something marketable, a marketable degree. And here now, almost 15-ish, 20-ish years later, like I'm working on an MBA right now because I basically have 2 like worthless degrees in religion and theology, trying to make myself more marketable. Not that I want to leave the church, but because like I realized like, yeah, it's not what it used to be, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not. And I have the privilege of my husband working, and he's the primary breadwinner. I also work. I also am a freelance writer. I have supporters and stuff on Patreon that support my anti-racism work, and so I'm able to pull in some money and stuff there. But that's really privilege, honestly, to be able to make a living, and not everybody else has that. Not everyone else has a partner that makes enough money that you can survive off of one income if you need to. And
that gets back to the seminary thing too, because I remember during seminary, like all my classmates were working in churches, either voluntary or getting paid a little bit, and I was like, I have to support my wife and who's going to school at the time too, and so it's definitely challenging.
Yeah,
it
definitely can be.
Well, let me ask you, if I can, like, this is kind of a generic question, but I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think thinking about your work in anti-racism and just kind of many things that I imagine you've experienced in church, and something that I've thought about, like, why still church? I mean, you've planted a church, like you've really invested your life in a church, and I ask this as someone who deeply loves the church and is passionate about like this thing we call church, but I also like am very aware of like the real hurt and pain it can cause. And I just want to ask you, like, why church for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, we definitely have to place, if not like, at the center and like, wave it around as like the only thing that we discuss. I think that we do have to say, at least, church has been a source of pain.
Yeah.
It's been a source of hurt. It's been a source of heartache for a lot of folks. And for some people, like that pain, that heartache, that whatever, it's something that is insurmountable for them. So the pain, I've also experienced pain in church, and it's been difficult. It's been hard. I've had a lot of sleepless nights because of things that have happened in church. Yeah. I've had a lot of anxiety and a lot of trauma and a lot of different things because of stuff that's happened in church. And so, I don't want to minimize that. I don't want to minimize those experiences at all. I think that it's something that we as the church, we have to admit to, we have to own, we have to act. We can't stop. We can't afford to just pretend like church is perfect. And so I think that for me, church is the reason why church for me is because it's not perfect. It's
Oh,
messy. It's something like, I mean, churches are messy. Church drama is messy.
yeah.
It's messy whenever people do things that they're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's like I could talk about that all day long. It's messy. It's difficult. But I think that the way that my personality is set up is that I am a type of person that I tend to look at things that can be hard and difficult spaces to be in and say, that's where I need to be.
Wow.
I need to be where that is, because you know what? God is in that mess. Now, hear me whenever I say God is in the mess. I'm not saying that God, people are like, oh yeah, God's in that.
Yeah.
God isn't in somebody molesting somebody. Okay. Like God was not in that. God didn't say,
Right.
well, no, that's not what I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm not justifying racism. I'm not justifying homophobia and transphobia. I'm not justifying sexism and saying, well, God's in that. God's in the church. God's in that. No, God doesn't want any of that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I know is that whenever I say that God is in it, whenever I say God is in our mess, God is in, I really truly believe that God is someone that redeems. He's a God that that gives people second chances. He's a God that says, I mean, I think of the Apostle Peter, and he was a fisherman, and he was just this fisherman, and Jesus was like, hey, follow me. And so Peter followed him. And then Jesus told Peter, like, hey, guess what? You're going to deny me. And, before cock crows 3 times, you're going to deny me. And Peter's like, no, Jesus, it's good. No, Jesus, I'm right for you. It's like, whatever. And what did Peter do? Peter denied Jesus. Denied Jesus. Was like, and the Bible basically says he cursed
I don't
Jesus.
know
Like
you.
he was like, I don't know that. And you could insert probably like choice language there.
Yep.
And like, what happened? Like, Peter, after Jesus was dead, it was whatever. He went back to fishing. He was on the boat. He was just like, okay, well, I had to mess that up. You had to chopped off that man's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane. Then I done denied Jesus, and like, Jesus don't have nothing to do with me. And then what happened? Jesus rises from the dead. He shows up, and he goes to Peter, and he pulls Peter in, and he's like, Peter, like, hey, do you love me? Like, hey, okay, if you love me, feed my sheep. And so then we see Peter next, like after all the resurrection appearances and all this other type of stuff, and after the ascension, we see Peter in Acts 2 being the person that whenever the Holy Spirit was imparted to the church, we see Peter, the one being the person that
right
stands
there.
up, and he's right there. The person who was a mess, the person who denied Jesus, the person that was like, I don't know him, the person that was just like, I'm gonna go back to fishing, the person that was just like, I'm gonna chop off some dude's ear, like that person was there. And like the book of Acts centers Peter at first, and then it switches to Paul, right. And then even after all that, Peter was still a mess. We found out in Galatians that Paul had to call Peter on the carpet for some of his behavior, and so we see that. But he was still an apostle, and God still used him to God still anointed Peter to be able to share the good news of who Jesus was. And so whenever I say that God's in the mess, that doesn't mean that God's sitting there giving his stamp of approval. Right. God isn't giving their stamp of approval on everything that every ratchet person in the church does. And I think that it grieves God's heart whenever there are people that act a fool in the church, yet I really believe that God is there trying to help people, trying to redeem people, trying to give people those second chances. Sometimes those second chances turn into third, fourth, 15th chances. And you know what? There are times whenever God's like, nope, I'm not down with this. Like, y'all, like you've got to go. I mean, like you can't be up in here doing this. And so, I mean, I think that, and I'm not, trying to liken my personality and character to Christ at all, because I am not anywhere near that. But I think that I see that God wants to, where I see God is in those places that are messy. And so my hope in being in the church and why I choose to be a minister is because I think that it is so important for the people who are outcast, the people who are looked down upon by society, that those people have a chance to know the love of God.
Yeah.
And I think that so many times, and I say this once again as somebody who spent a lot of their adult life in the Bible Belt, where there's like church becomes like this cool kid thing, and it becomes like the cool kid table, and like you've got all these different churches, like you've got all the different churches that like, oh here's the cool kid church that does this, and here's the alpha churches and the beta churches, and we got the church and you got the gossip, and you got the like, oh, this person left this group and went to this group, and you got just like all this other stuff. Well, for me, like whenever I was in high school, I didn't realize this until like hindsight, but I was like really, really super popular in high school. But I wasn't like, I was a cool kid, but I wasn't like the part of the cool kid. Like, so me being a teenager growing up in the like late 90s and in 2000, I graduated high school in 2004. So some of my vernacular might not be like, hip to today's vernacular, but like I wasn't a prep. So like the preps, whenever I was growing up in school, the preps were like the people who they most often their parents were rich, or of means, but not always. Not every. I came from a small town, so not everybody was like that. But they were the people that were just that were popular. That they were the people who were on the cheerleading squad and the student council, and they were the ones that all the teachers loved, even though some of them like were just like trashed everybody else.
Right.
And just they were kind of the clean cut all American kids. And like I was not part of that group. I was a cool kid, but I was not part of that group at all. I mean, I was like, if my group was anything, it was like kind of the band / fine arts nerds.
Yeah.
But I had friends literally everywhere in the school. And like literally, like I was friends from I could hang with the people who were the most popular, but I didn't like go and hang out with them or whatever. But those kids respected me, all the way down to the kids that like people were sitting at the table by themselves. And I remember last year, I think it was, I was at my 15th high school reunion, and it was back in our hometown, and it was at a restaurant or something, or like a bar or some I don't know, I don't even keep up at home like that, but it was some place that some establishment that people gather at. And so, different people from my class were there, and a lot of them were preps. A lot of my friends, a lot of kids I hung out with, like they were like, they're not like, hell no, I'm not coming back to high school reunion. I'm not going back there. I'm not going back there like for like reunion, whatever. But there was a woman who walked in, and a lot of people didn't recognize her. I don't think. A lot of people were like, okay, like this person is standing near us, and they seem like that they're supposed to be part of our class, but they didn't recognize her at first. And so I looked at her, and I was looking, and I was like, okay, I remember this woman. And she was the girl in school that she was overweight. She was very poor, didn't smell very well. A lot of times in elementary school, she was the kid that like everybody made fun of. Everyone made fun of her. Like she was the butt of like everybody's jokes and everything. And so I'm not saying this like, to like brag on myself or anything like that, but just as like she was there, I'm like, oh, hey girl, how you doing? Like whatever, you sit down, just talking with her, whatever. And so one of my good friends, been good friends and stuff since second grade. I went over, and she was like, after I got through talking to her, I went over, sat by my friend, and my friend just looked at me, and she was like, you always make everybody feel so damn important.
Wow.
And I was just like, and I mean, wasn't really thinking about it. I was like, high school reunion, I went into like youth pastor mode. Like I'm trying to, gather everybody and make sure that everybody's having a good time. And like, I'm not the class president or anything, but like, I'm here and like, I'm trying to make sure everybody's having a good time and everybody feels seen and everybody's like, whatever. Cause I'm just in youth pastor mode. Cause that's what you do as a youth pastor.
Right.
Like you have kids, you have kids from all different kinds of groups. You're trying to get them you're trying to like not have a fight. You're trying to not have, like, you're trying to make everybody feel welcome. And so I have just, so I liken that to church. And that I've always been the person that if, and I was like this even as a teenager, like there'd be kids in band that like, and band isn't like really I mean, there are cool kids in band, but band isn't really like the cool kid thing. There'd be even among people in band, like the kid that like just got on everybody's nerve and they're like, shut up, whatever. I would always be the person that was like, no, don't talk to that kid that way. Like, yeah, he's annoying, but like, we're going to be nice to him. like even whenever the band director is like, okay, this kid hits my nerve. I really hate this kid. I'm like, no, we're gonna be nice to John. We're gonna treat him nicely. And so like I think that a lot of that is my approach to church. Is that it's like, I want the cool kids to come to my church. Like whenever I start a church, I want the cool kids to be there. I want the preppy kids to be there. But I also want the church to be full of the kids that were poor and smelled bad, and nobody wanted to be around them, and they were the butt of everyone's jokes, and nobody cares about them. And I want to be able to go and not make them feel important because I'm anybody important and have anything to make anybody feel important. But I just think that that's what Jesus would do. And I just think that like Jesus, that if we're talking about, like once again, by product of being a late 90s, 2000s, early 2000s kid, WWJD, that became a thing. You have WWJD bracelets and stuff.
WWJD.
And like, I'm just like, what would Jesus do? Yeah. And I just feel like that in terms of church, like, I think like, what would Jesus do? There's this institution where we're talking about a man who can change people's lives. And there's people who've done like there's people who've done like just like a lot of crappy stuff, like just period, like that in the name of that. And that sucks. And I hate that. But I just feel like that Jesus would be like, I just feel like that Jesus would be like, I know that people, people were doing it in his time, and people were making like a mockery of God in his time. And I just feel like that Jesus would be like, okay, cool. Like, they're doing that, and whatever, go off. But like, I'm here for y'all. And like, this is like, I'm going to grab the fishermen and the zealots and like the tax collectors and all these people, the women who were caught in adultery, the prostitutes, the people who were marginal women, who were like super marginalized in society. Like, that's who I'm going to hang around. And that's who like I'm going to start a movement with. And so I guess that's why that's why I'm here, is to be like, well, Jesus loves everybody, and so I'm just going to be here and love everybody, and
that's awesome.
Hopefully it not be too big of a mess.
That's awesome. Well, let me ask you real quick, and we got to take a break after this. When you think about kind of like this time that we're in with COVID, with the social justice movement and anti-racism movement that's really come to the forefront, like, what do you think, like, how is this going to affect the church going forward? What do you think?
I think that the church is really going to have to, everybody that isn't a denomination that is inhabited by, as a predominating force, or wasn't started by marginalized folks, everybody's going to have a moment of reckoning. Every group, people, whether or not the denomination started before slavery, during slavery, after slavery, before the civil rights, during the civil rights movement, after the civil rights movement, everybody is going to have to come to a moment of reckoning of their complicity, these institutions and their complicity in racism. That's virtually everybody. Yeah.
That's great. Well, let's take a break, and we'll come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Ally Henny, and let's. I tell people, Ally, you can take these closing questions as seriously or not as you'd like to, but if you're Pope for a day, do you have one agenda item you'd like to accomplish?
So if I was the Pope, like we talking about the Catholic Pope?
Well, generally, but if you can be imaginative here, this is all hypothetical.
Okay, like I didn't know if like Pope was like supposed to be a metaphor for something. Okay, if I was the literal Catholic Pope, I would be like, okay, women can be ordained in ministry, and y'all can get married.
Great. Do you have a theological or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life?
Oh wow. So okay, I was thinking about this one. Goodness, it's really hard to think. So like, I would want to meet James Cone. James Cone passed away like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So I mean, so I feel like that he's been around like long enough that it's like, okay, well, that seems silly to resurrect him, just to be like, because I mean, he passed away recently
Right.
enough that it's sort of like let the man rest. Like as far as, I mean, I don't know, maybe Howard Thurman,
Okay.
who wrote Jesus and the Disinherited, or Harriet Tubman, who we don't often think of as a theologian, but like, you know, I don't know, some Black woman somewhere that did something. In terms of historical figures, I'll like give me a second because I know the answer to this. I know the answer to this. Who would it be?
Well, you want me to come back to that?
No, I could do this. I'm trying to like I have a couple in my mind and I'm trying to decide. I don't know why I'm taking this so seriously, but I'm like, no, I have to give a good answer.
That's great.
Goodness. Okay, in terms of historical. So we're saying historical or like biblical? Like,
I mean, I leave it open to interpretation.
Okay, so I'm going to say somebody that's not in the Bible.
Yeah.
I'm going to take historical to mean someone who is not in the Bible. So I think that maybe I would resurrect Origin.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that maybe I would resurrect Origin, or I'm trying to think of somebody else, or really like can it be a group of people?
Hey, you're making the rules here.
Okay, I'm making the rules here. So okay, I am not very good at church history. I mean, I am, but I'm not. And I'm probably gonna make a fool of myself here. But I really want to resurrect, and I can't remember who it is, but I really need to resurrect the dude who is the Bishop of Rome, who is the Pope, who was just like basically like the group of people who decided to add the filioque clause to the Nicene Creed. Oh. I need to like resurrect all of those people, because and the reason for this is because I'm gonna get kind of nerdy on this. I actually don't agree with the filioque clause. I think that the Eastern Church is right. I don't think that the Holy Spirit proceeds from both the Father and the Son. I don't believe in double procession. I think that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. I think that the double procession doctrine.
Oh, we're getting deep here, folks.
I know that people like you're like, oh, but it's biblical, whatever. But the unintended consequence of the double procession doctrine is that it subordinates the Holy Spirit to the Father and the Son.
Yeah.
And I think this is my Pentecostalism coming out.
Yeah,
I think that has led to a suppression of the Holy Spirit in the Western church and in Western thought. And I will not get too deep into it, but I also think that they did not do this because of these reasons, but I think that it also has allowed a root of misogyny into the church, because the Holy Spirit is referred to in the Old Testament with female pronouns, and in the New Testament, rather, the Holy Spirit is often referred to in neuter pronouns. So like they them pronouns,
right?
Essentially, or it, more specifically, it is the accurate way to say that. And so I think that because we have subordinated in the West the Holy Spirit to the Father and the Son, and just basically kind of said, okay, well, it's just the Father and the Son that's there, and then the Holy Spirit is like the bond of love or whatever. It just kind of eliminates the Holy Spirit. And so the Holy Spirit, if you think of the Holy Spirit as having some, nurturing and kind of feminine attributes, it then allows men to be like, oh, well, that's like a bunch of feminine crap. Yeah. And so we don't need that. So songs. So then in our hymnity, not really like hymns, but in our, contemporary worship things, there are pastors that are like, get really sketch on songs that emphasize some of those aspects that are things that we talk about the Holy Spirit, that we would think about the Holy Spirit doing. So anyway, that was really super deep, but going back to the question is like, I need to resurrect all those people. Cause first of all, like homie, I can't remember who it was, but homie who was like, yeah, we ain't doing that. Like we are just gonna add this clause. The rest of the church is like, hold up. And Bishop of Rome's just like, this is what we're doing. and like y'all just gonna have to live with it. And I can't remember homeboy's name, but he's just like, we're gonna have to live with it. First of all, I'm just like, how are you going to do that with like four other groups of churches, four other Cs? Like, you just are going to unilaterally just decide something. How did you do this? But then I also need to know, like, how these other dudes, like, how do they really feel about that? And like, was it cultural diversity? Like, I just need to know what happened, and just so I can argue with them, because I want to like get in the Bishop of Rome's face and be like, what are you doing, man? Like, this isn't going to do what you think it's going to do.
I love it. Speaking of like historical, like, any thoughts on like what this time and place will be remembered for in like 500 years?
Lord, if we make it that long, like all these folks showing out, not wearing their mask and everything. Like, man, so like,
wear your masks, folks.
I mean, please let us live to be able to see 500 years from now, Lord. So I think that in like reality, because with history, there's always like what people choose to remember, and then like what actually happened. And so then you have to have like so it's always like the marginalized people that will tell what actually happened. So I think that like what history is going to remember, what American history is going to remember, is that they're going to somehow like spin the narrative into, oh yes, Americans came together and it was like this wonderful time of ingenuity and blah 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 blah. Yeah. Whenever it wasn't that. Like, I think that's how like people are going to remember it. Like, that's like, those are the stories that are going to get told potentially. I don't know. Stuff could be just like so bad that it's like, oh yeah, this was horrible. Like, but I mean, we even managed to make the Great Depression into like a hero's tale. Yeah. And it's really not. Yeah. But like it became like, oh, well, look how much ingenuity all these people, is white people. I mean, everybody else, I guess, you know, some of the marginalized folks were just living the way that they had been living. I mean, so it affected people, but not quite in the same way. But they were able to kind of make themselves, at least Wall Street and corporate greed, but somehow the people who suffered from it were able to make, the white people who suffered from it were able to make themselves into like heroes, and like, yeah, you know, my granddaddy pulled himself up from the bootstraps. He was in Oklahoma, and whatever the story is, and not, you know, to make fun of that, but I mean, you know, Americans just have a way of making like a hero's saga out of anything, and I'm just like, y'all just be like on one with that. But I think that those are going to be the stories of like, oh yeah, they persevered. You know, the virus was scary, but like, as far as like but like the way that people are like really going to remember it, or the people from below, I think it's going to be I think that like the way that I would tell, when my kids are living through it, but the way that I would tell my kids about it and tell my grandkids about it, is that there were a lot of people out there showing their behinds and wouldn't do something as basic as wearing a piece of cloth over their face when they went outside. And so we could have been done had it beat, but we could have crushed the curve in like a month, but people cared too much about their sense of American freedom to be able to wear. They cared way too much about that instead of caring about their neighbor. And so the pandemic lasted for however long it lasted, and sure, there are all these hero stories that people tell about it, but really, like, you know, it could have lasted 3 months, and then we could have been done with it and been living like the rest of the world had been.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, so thank you so much for your time, Ally. Where can people find out more about you?
So you can go to my website, allyhenny.com. It's just my name. .com. And so there, like, you're able to connect to my blog, which is the Armchair Commentary, the armchaircommentary.com. There's a link to that, and and coming soon on my website, just haven't enabled the widgets yet. You'll be able to connect to my different social media feeds. But as far as on social media, you can find me on Facebook. You just type in my name, and there's a public page that's there that I try to post to on a daily basis. My schedule has been a little bit off. I think I generally do it daily, but it's been a little bit off because of the pandemic. And then I am on Twitter as @thearmchaircom, which of course is short for the Armchair Commentary. Back then they didn't let you have that many letters on Twitter. So I have that, and then I'm on Instagram as Ally Henny, and then I also have a Patreon. That's just my name, and I do some content and stuff for my patrons every month there. So for as little as $2 a month, you can support some of my anti-racism work.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much again for your time. A lot of fun talking to you, as I always enjoy talking to people who have roots in Springfield too. It's a funny part of my history, but blessings during this crazy time, and health. I pray for you and your family, and peace. So peace be with you.
Well, thank you. Peace also with you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. But hey, before you go, do us a favor, subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people. Thanks, and go in peace.